So how do you determine when someone needs a transplant?
The vast majority of people who do undergo transplantation have what we call end-stage heart failure. So there are different pathways for heart disease to end up with heart failure, but as the name implies, in case the heart's not working. And the people with heart failure, we have quite effective medications for some of these patients, and there are others can be improved with various surgical procedures, some with pacemakers. So there's a range of treatment options, but none of these treatments are cures for heart failure. A lot of them will stabilize the patient, sometimes for years, sometimes for decades, but eventually these patients will tend to come back as the drugs no longer work as effectively as they did when they were first started. And so some of the clues are that people who are on all the best medical treatment that we have and are still doing poorly, that's the sort of person that we would consider for heart transplantation. So they've exhausted all the alternative treatment options, and they've got a terrible quality of life generally. So they're very limited. Some of the people that I don't know who will listen to this, but doctors talk about NYHA functional class. NYHA is New York Heart Association, which is an association that no longer exists, but its legacy is this functional classification. And basically patients who have symptoms on either at rest when they're doing nothing, so they're either breathless and tired all the time, or they have those symptoms on minimal activity, just doing simple activities of daily living like showering, dressing. They're the sort of people who we would consider for transplant. There are important lifestyle considerations. So one of the issues is smoking, for instance. There's now a blanket policy that we won't accept people who smoke or who, if their heart disease was a consequence of smoking in an earlier stage and they've stopped smoking, we would certainly consider that person for transplant. But if they continue to smoke, then the answer is no. People talk about, is there an upper age limit for consideration for heart transplantation? Again, the answer to that is no, we don't set an upper age limit, but the reality is that as you get older, you tend to accumulate not just problems with the heart, but problems with other organ systems as well, and what we call comorbidities. And it's often these comorbidities that will make someone unsuitable for a transplant, even though they have severe heart failure. If someone has an active cancer, again, that will generally rule out that person, because the drugs that we give after a transplant, the immunosuppressive drugs, will often accelerate the growth of a pre-existing cancer if there's one there. So part of the screening process that's involved in the workup for a transplant is to make sure that there isn't any unrecognized cancer or anything like that. And that's the exception rather than the rule to find it. But if you don't look, you never quite know. One of the things that we've become quite interested in more recently is the concept of frailty. And people with advanced heart failure often become quite weak and frail. And we know that in young people even if they become very weak, lose a lot of weight, lose a lot of strength, by and large, that frailty is completely reversible if you can transplant them with a normal heart. And we know that this, as I say, this is reversible frailty. In the older person, it can be harder to tell whether if they're frail, whether it's because of their heart problem or because of the other comorbid problems that they have. And that's still an area of active ongoing research, but we know that if you if you're over the age of 70 and you're frail, you're a very high risk person for a poor outcome after a transplant.
Right. So yeah, the age is obviously a massive role there. And I understand that, for me, I was quite frail at that end stage organ failure when I was put on the list. But yeah, the recovery for me was nothing short of astonishing. It's far beyond what I thought I'd ever be able to do. So yeah, living proof.
So we actually do a formal frailty assessment in everyone that, regardless of their age, we do it in everyone who's referred for a transplant. We also do a cognitive assessment to test their higher mental functions, and we do a depression sort of questionnaire as well. And that's all. It's very interesting to look at their performance before and after the transplant. And the physical frailty is where you see the most dramatic reversal or improvement. But often, as you'd expect with depression, a lot of people are understandably depressed pre-transplant, and that usually does extremely well post-transplant. With cognition, the changes are more subtle, but most people are cognitively intact before their transplant and don't lose anything after the transplant.